Welcome to this Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, which is being held virtually with everyone accessing the meeting from remote locations. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Some of you may already be aware that I have a condition called adult onset epilepsy, which occasionally results in me experiencing short absences or mild seizures. On the rare occasions that this may happen in a meeting, you should not be alarmed, and should I as chair experience one of these absences or have any other technical ICT difficulties during the meeting, it has been agreed that Councillor Freya Bledsoe will step in temporarily as chair, and in her absence, then Councillor Penhale Thomas will step in during the meeting. Please can everyone ensure that mobile phones are switched off or switched to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda, and I will ask the officer to present a brief summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Officers and members are reminded to refer to the page numbers contained in the public version of the agenda report pack. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their microphones on at that point, but I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your microphone switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference. However, as a trial measure, I would invite members and officers to leave their cameras on for the duration of the meeting. If any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should click the raise hand icon at the top right-hand side of the Microsoft Teams window, and I will come to you in the order that I receive requests. Please lower your hand once you've finished speaking. The instant messaging chat button has been disabled for this meeting. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout its duration, and where necessary, will mute those not being used. I will ask officers to introduce themselves when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones are switched off when not in use. So I'll now proceed to the agenda and item 1, apologies for absence. Jess?
Thank you, Chair. I haven't received any apologies for absence, but Councillor Paul Davies has indicated that he will need to leave the meeting prior to the end. Thank you.
Thank you. We received apologies from Councillor Tim Thomas. So if those could be recorded, and I'll come now to Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just going to give apologies for Councillor Tim Thomas. Thanks.
Okay, we both picked that up. Councillor Ross Thomas, please.
Morning, Chair. Board. Thanks very much. I'll need to leave early due to work commitments as well. Apologies.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Are there any other apologies for absence? No, so we go to item 2 and ask declarations of interest. If any member has a declaration of interest to declare, please click on the raise hand icon. I can't see anyone indicating, so we will go to item 3 and ask the approval of minutes. Please can I have a mover and seconder for the minutes?
I'll move, Chair.
And I'll second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walter. Thank you very much, Councillor Granville. Okay, moving to our first substantive item on the agenda today, and that's item 4, Budget Monitoring 2023-24 Quarter 2 Revenue Forecast. I will now ask the Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change, Caris Lord, to briefly introduce the report. Caris.
Many thanks, Chair. And just for the record, I'm Caris Lord. I am the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change. So what you have in front of you today is an update on the Council's revenue position as at the 30th of September 2023. So very briefly for you, the approved budget for this year, the net budget is 342 million. And the projected outturn for the current financial year is shown for you this morning at table 1 of the report. So the table outlines for you a projected position for the year based on the figures at the end of September, which is a net overspend of £10.9 million. This is made up of a net overspend on directorate budgets of £15.3 million and a net underspend of £4.4 million on our council-wide budgets. This is a change from the projection based on the quarter 1 figures, where the overspend was predicted to be £9.7 million. So we have seen an increase in the predicted overspend for the year. There's a lot of information in your report, Chair, and I know that you want relevant officers and members to talk about individual services. I'll just pick up on a few on the corporate things, if that's all right with you, as they may not come out otherwise. I just want to reassure you as well, actually, that this level of in-year pressure is not unique to Bridgend, and many of you will have seen these things being reported for other local authorities in Wales and beyond, actually. But saying that, this level of overspend within Bridgend County Borough in year is unprecedented, and obviously we will do everything we can to try and rein that back in during the year. As I said, there's a lot of information in the report, just particularly with regards to the council-wide issues. You will see there is some detail in the report there. Some of the underspends are in relation to capital financing charges. The main reason for that is because interest rates have gone up. And whereas that is causing issues in some areas, it does mean that the money we invest is working harder on our behalf, and therefore the interest that we've earned in year has been higher than we'd predicted. There is a figure in there of just £1.4 million, which is given to you as a total figure, just to give you an idea of what's included in that, Chair. We have a budget in relation to redundancy costs, which sits in our base budget and is there to support if we do have to incur redundancies. There's a significant underspend on that this year of £900,000. We've not been making people redundant, and therefore we're not anticipating that position either in the current financial year. So that's an underspend for this year. We also give discretionary relief on business rates. And we have an underspend on that currently this year of 175,000. Now that's probably because the rating levels changed in this year and there's increased support for businesses in the first year of that change. So we're anticipating that being in there for the remainder of the year. And there's also an underspend. We do have a budget about supporting the medium-term financial strategy if we have in-year financial pressures. And there's an underspend in there of just over 300,000 as well. So though between them, those three headings bring us up to the 1.4 million that's detailed in your report that's out this morning, Chair. So if I can, I just take you to the recommendations in section 9 then, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carison. You have predicted some of my questions there, which is useful. I don't think the leader is present in the meeting, but perhaps I can ask the deputy leader just to provide her views on the council-wide budgets first of all, and then ask if, I don't know whether Mark Shepherd, our chief executive, is in the meeting, but perhaps ask him as well for his perspective. So, Councillor Gebby.
So what do I think? I think it's nearly 15 years of austerity now. I think her services across the board have been cut to the bone. I think we need to reprioritise. I think the leader will be joining us now. I've just heard his door slam, so I'm assuming so. He will be joining us. I do think we need to refocus our spend, and I think that's going to be a difficult decision for all members across the board. I do think we need to have some difficult and courageous conversations. That won't be just us as administration. There are various budget recommendations, reports that will be coming through scrutiny at later dates. I think that's important too. We do value your input and contributions. Are we able to facilitate all of them? No, we're not going to be able to. Are we going to be able to facilitate everybody's wishes, wants and needs? No, if it's a need, I think that's what we need to address on, not our wishes and not our wants. I don't think we're in any different position than any other council across the UK. I think we're in a better financial position than some, and it's still going to be enormously challenging, Alex. I think you need to go on to directorates, if I'm really honest. I think that would give you more insight, especially as to where we all particularly sit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know whether the leader's joined us now, but I'll invite him to speak, or perhaps Mark, you can come in to provide your perspective.
I'm happy to do so briefly. I won't repeat some of the things the Dep has said for obvious reasons. I just think probably it's helpful if I just give you a little bit of context and overview. So we have, as Caris has highlighted to you, almost an 11 million projected net overspend in year, which is unprecedented in the way it's described. If I just put that into context, if we don't address that, your starting point for next year's budget is minus 11 million. We anticipate at the moment, in the absence of any other advice, that the overall Welsh local government settlement will be 3.1% on average. We actually usually get slightly less than that, so it might be 2.9%. It might be 3% at best. They haven't even committed to necessarily giving us that amount. On that basis of that level of funding, and with inflation running at an average in year of 8%, we estimate that might require a further £7.2 million worth of savings. So 11 plus 7, that's 18. And then in addition, there is always, even though we try and restrict it, there is always growth elements that we can't always wholly control. That gets you very quickly to a conservative 20 million. And that, I hope, illustrates why, therefore, we need to take action now. So if I just quickly, perhaps, just as context, share with you our 5-point action plan for what we've done in year. So what we've introduced a selective intelligent vacancy freeze. Very much the focus is on, do you absolutely have to make this appointment? If you do, are there other ways that we could cover it? But if you don't, okay, we go ahead, particularly if it's going to cost you more by employing agency instead or whatever it might be. That's in place. Obviously, we're only a few weeks into it. You won't necessarily have seen the impact of that yet. Indeed, in fact, there may even be some posts that are legacy of before that was in place. And the other thing I'll say is occasionally that, well, of course, if it's grant funded and there's no way of using the grant differently, for rather than not using the money at all, if it helps provide better services to the public, then we may go ahead with the post anyway. So the first is the vacancy freeze. The second is an instruction around essential spend. Again, the definition of that is really difficult. You can't bring that down to the nth degree, but what we are doing is asking all staff to think very, very carefully before they spend. My experience and Karis's experience, by simply making that instruction, people think very carefully, they think more carefully about spend, and it does make a difference. And that's probably the factor that will make the biggest difference over the next 6 months is restricting what we spend. What I will say, and this may be obvious, but I'll say it anyway, is of course in doing so, we are at times impacting on the level or the frequency of service, because clearly on both of those two issues, if you haven't got the same number of staff or if you're not spending in the same way, that will have an impact on the level of service. And I think that's the DEP's point, I suppose, about trying to, sorry, Councillor Gebby's point about trying to really understand that this has an impact, and we do have to focus and prioritise really carefully. The third is about buildings. Try to make sure that we make more effective use of our buildings. We have in place, but it can't happen as quickly as I'd like, but we have in place a plan to empty Ravens Court and to focus our activities within Civic, but also generally trying to restrict our use of any external buildings for any use, and trying to generally maximise the use of the assets that we already have. That's also been introduced. The fourth is around charges. So we don't normally do this very regularly, but in-year charges, where can we increase charges in-year, particularly on the basis of trying to make services pay for themselves. So there's an exercise going on that will look at a whole range of charges there, where perhaps we can introduce something within year. And the final is there's a very significant sum of money that comes into the authority every year in grants. Now, obviously, they are mostly quite restrictive in the way they can be used. But if there is a way of using those grants in a different way, particularly to pick up some core business, then again, we need to look at that very, very carefully as well. So that is the 5-point plan. In addition, and just to reiterate one thing the DEP said, for me, the really clear thing here for all members and indeed the members of the public is that we're going to have to focus and prioritise so much more carefully. And that is difficult because there's rarely a consensus, is there, on absolutely everything that we focus and prioritise on, and there will be some disagreements, but that's the crux of this for me. We're going to have to be really, really clear and articulate really, really clearly what those priorities are. So just as context, probably that's the more helpful contribution I can make before you get into the directed issues, but thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark, for that comprehensive response. Really appreciate that. Councillor Gebby.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought it'd be worth making a further contribution, and that's about pay and prices. The NJC have not agreed our workforce pay settlement this year. They're actually meeting, I think it's October the 24th now, as the 3 trade unions. But I think it's worth reflecting that every 1% that they get in a pay rise, and I think that's justified, is £1 million to a council spend. So we need to be very careful here about how we discuss things. You have to remember that we're talking, our biggest cost across the council is staffing, so our workforce. So we have to be very careful about how we discuss this, please. And that's my plea to all members here. You have to remember when you're talking about cutting services, or you make a decision like that in a public forum, workforce. And and I really can't stress that enough. I do think we need to be measured in our approach, and I do think we need to be kind to each other, because this is not going to be easy conversations. They are going to be extremely difficult. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gebbie. Councillor Farr, please.
I'm sorry I was late, Chair. Issues with my IT. I just wanted to give my apologies. I need to leave about 11:45, so I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Thank you.
No problem at all. We'll ensure that you have the opportunity to introduce your directorate when we come to the Communities Directorate. Councillor Farr, thank you. Before we move on to questions, I just want to give the leader an opportunity to speak on the council-wide pressures, because the Chief Executive and the Deputy Leader has. So is there anything you'd like to add, Leader?
I think the Chief Executive and the Deputy Leader have given a good overview of where we are. I'll repeat it again. This is unprecedented in terms of its scale. It is our focus now, obviously, as a cabinet, as a council, as a CMB, is how we navigate the way through these very difficult financial challenges, and the focus is going to be on the overspend for this year, but also planning for the coming years as well, and it will require us all working together where we can, and obviously we welcome the input and a contribution of members today to that process, which will be a long process, but I'm confident that well, we will find a way forward. We have done in the past, and we'll do it again this time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor David, Councillor Gebbie and Mark, for just giving us some overall context there. Perhaps I can start just by saying at Q1, of course, we were at an overspend of 9.727 million and a shortfall on savings target of 200,000. Now at Q2, the projected position is a net overspend of 10.932 million, which is largely mitigated by the 4.352 million, which has served to reduce the overspend, that 4.352 million, of course, on council-wide budgets, and a 15.284 million net overspend on directorates. I know that's largely attributed to capital financing, Caris, but given the challenging time for directorates, I don't know whether this is possible, because I'm not a financial expert, but committee members have asked whether this significant underspending council-wide budget, given the significant underspending council-wide budgets, whether it's possible to repurpose this funding to ensure that directorate budgets are supported. So furthermore, then, building on what Mark, Councillor Davies and Councillor Gebbie have said, at 3.1.12, you say that in March, the most likely scenario is that we would have to make a £17 million budget reduction over the next 4 years. Now, what's the latest best guess projection given the current circumstances and given what Mark has said with regards to a potential 3% uplift in the revenue support grant from Welsh Government? What measures are the administration actively considering to mitigate some of these overspends, both in terms of in-year spending? I know that Mark has outlined some of them. And then what are some of the longer term tools in our armoury which will help the local authority navigate through this financial turbulence?
Would you like me to come in there, Chair, on some
Yes,
of those?
please, Caris.
Yeah.
Thanks.
With regards to whether or not we would reallocate some of the money that's currently in the council-wide budgets, I think we don't anticipate that position changing considerably on those council-wide budgets now for the rest of the year. We wouldn't normally reallocate those budgets at this stage, but when we look at the overall position for the council, we will take a net position. So we will obviously net that, as we have done in your report this morning, net that off against the total budget. we wouldn't be reallocating. One thing I can confirm though is we will look at some of those when we're looking at the budget setting process for next year. So if we anticipate that actually the underspends on any of those headings are likely to continue into the next financial year, we can certainly propose a reallocation at that point, which may well mean movement from the council-wide budgets into service specific, if that's the most appropriate thing to do with those. So I would suggest for you that's a sort of a year-end budget setting issue that we would need to deal with. With regards to our best guess, if you like, as the report says, we were anticipating £17 million. I think Mark has already outlined, really, I think in reality, that's probably up closer to £20 million now. There isn't a lot of allowance within that £17 million for cost pressures going forward, and you'll all be aware that all of our services require growth of some form or another, whether that's to meet changes in requirements or whether that's to meet increase in demand or just generally inflation issues. So our best guess, if you like, at the moment is about a 20 million gap if you take all of that into account. And mitigating actions, Mark did outline those for you. They've only recently kicked in, so as he rightly said, it's going to be a little while before we see that. But it is, I think, about us all changing our mindsets as well, going back to what's already been said this morning about it's what we need to do and not maybe what we would like to do, and what some expectations that people have. I think we all need to be very much in the same place with regards to that when it comes to any type of spend from now on in.
Thank you, Caris. Councillor Gebbie?
Contribution now. We keep talking about overspends in various directorates, but social services has been funded on EMRs for many years now, and it's not part of our core spend when you look at budgets. So the education department are very clear about what's grant funded. In fact, fair dues to Lindsay, I'm just putting this out there, fair dues to Lindsay's directorate, they've actually got a really good breakdown of their account systems and things, and I think that's really useful because it actually tells you where our grants are, what's been funded by EMR rather than our RSG. I'm sure Caris will tell me the technical term for it, but base budget essentially spend in social services has been reliant on EMRs and grant funding for many, many years. Now we're operating above establishment. So I think we really need to understand what we need to spend, where that needs to sit in core budgets rather than being so reliant on grant funding all the times. And as members, I think that's something.
I've lost Councillor Gebbie. I don't know whether anyone else has. We'll just pause for one moment until she can come back. I'll bring her back in a moment if she returns to us. Perhaps in the meantime, Caris, I can just pick up another couple of points before we move to directorates. Councillor Gebbie mentioned staffing costs there and the variance of 1% on the pay settlement of NJC staff. That can result perhaps in a swing of over £1 million per annum. Now at 3.1.10, you mentioned that there could be insufficient funding to meet these pressures. So what is the contingency plan if there are significant unexpected pay and price inflation increases?
I think that's a very good question, and it's a very difficult answer in some ways, in that if you recall, the pay award for last year came in much higher than we'd anticipated. And in order to fund that, we did it by raiding, if you like, some of the contingencies that we have centrally. And I know that we've reported since then that it has reduced our flexibility with regards to our budgets. If we do have to find additional funding this year, it is going to be very difficult to do, and it will be about looking again centrally. There may be some money there, but I'm being honest with you, there's very little left in those central reserves anymore to support that. So I think we would have to possibly look at short-term funding for this year and build it into next year's base budget.
Okay, thank you, Caris. Councillor Williams. You're on mute, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I'm aware I'm on mute. Thank you. Thank you, Yeah, just before we move away from the council-wide, I don't know, because obviously it was a cabinet member for finances. It's a broad brush sort of portfolio that touches all areas, and there is something specific in you around the council-wide budgets on financing. So you've got the capital financing, you've got your council tax reduction scheme, you've got your council-wide budgets like pay and prices, as we just touched on, and the council tax collection. So if you just wanted me to offer a few comments on each of those bullet points, then I'm happy to do so. Or, I mean, there is sufficient detail, I believe, in the papers, but if you want me to contribute, I'm happy to do so.
Yes,
Chair.
it was remiss of me not to bring you in as cabinet member for finance earlier. So yeah, if you would like to comment on some of those council-wide issues which you mentioned in the report, that you'd be more than welcome.
Well, I'll try not to repeat what has already been said, because of course on the capital financing, whilst increased interest rates are a challenge in some areas, then actually this has been the silver lining on the cloud for the council, I suppose. It's or a very thin silver lining, if I should add. But we have had some extra monies from our investments. Of course, we do invest money when it's not needed immediately, and that has brought a benefit back to the authority. On the council tax reduction scheme, there is a small underspend there, but that is very much a demand-led scheme. It is intended to be fully funded by Welsh Government, but it doesn't quite meet it. It doesn't quite wash its face, shall we say? And so there is a small pressure on the authority there. And again, as we move through the year, then that might that small underspend might well be wiped out. We don't know about that. I think it's a very interesting debate around the pay and price pressures, because even though we retain a relatively large sum of money, a small percentage move in that can have a huge impact, as Councillor Gebbie have outlined. And it's very difficult to predict where, where price and pressures are going to come from. We go out to tender for various projects, and they can come in sometimes where we expect them. Sometimes they're massively overpriced, and therefore we have to meet those pressures from that budget. So you might think it's an easy pie to take a slice out of, but the risks of taking a slice out of that pie can be very significant. So I assure the scrutiny committee then, as a cabinet, we totally scrutinise the directors on that, and we try to make sure that that pot is appropriate then for our needs. And then on the council tax collection, I think that's an interesting one, really, because it is showing a possibility of an extra £1 million of income, but that is largely down to increased costs on vacant properties. And again, of course, we've just increased that again now going forward to second homes. So there's a small increase there, but that's not really good. That's going to run into the general fund then. I don't know if that's going to make a big difference going forward, but I think it's an example of us looking at our fees and charges, because that is going to be one of the key things going forward now for the next 6 months, is to make sure that we are getting the maximum income from any areas that we're entitled to make a charge to. So yeah, that was a bit of a canter, Chair, but I thought that it might be worth mentioning. Thank you.
Chair, do you mind if I jump in just on the empty properties point?
Yeah, thank you very much for your perspective, Councillor Williams. I'll bring Councillor Good now.
Thank you, Chair. Just on Councillor Williams's point, I think it is welcome that we are seeing that slight return on the increases to the council charges on empty properties. But of course, the point of the policy is to bring properties back into use. And I think what we need to bear in mind there, that while we are seeing that slight increase in terms of council tax returns, the hope would be that obviously those owners of those properties bring those properties back into use. So it's something I just want us to keep in mind, that we can't just look at that pot as something that will continue giving and add into the coffers, because the hope would be that actually we would see those properties brought back into economic or for housing. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Good, for that clarification. I'm aware that Councillor Gebbie froze on us, so I don't know whether you would like to come back in, Councillor Gebbie, to conclude your contribution before I bring in Councillor Pennell-Thomas.
Well, I'm sitting in my office, Chair, and I'm not quite sure where I got to. I don't want to turn my camera on because if I do, I'm worried that I'm going to drop out again. It's interesting, though. I listened to all the conversation. I think the contribution I just wanted to make was just about how EMRs and grant funding has been underpinning social services for years. And I do think we need to establish, exactly like education have done throughout their budget. It's an excellent example of how it's broken down. I do think we need to do that with social services so we can understand exactly what we should be having as core budget for social services rather than just being reliant on grant funding. I agree that we can earmark and transfer monies around to support different directorates, but I actually think we need to understand how much we need for social services in order that we fulfil our statutory duties rather than being reliant on the EMRs. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gebbie. I couldn't agree with you more. So, Councillor Pennell-Thomas, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks to officers for the report today. I imagine for many of us, in particular in colleagues in the finance department, reports of this nature feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, but worse every time. I think the two words that I have to describe the content of these reports are bleak and miserable, really. I just wanted to pick up on the Deputy Leader's point, and I think it's a point very well made around earmarked reserves and in particular grant funding. And this comes up regularly when we discuss budget monitoring. Large parts of our service delivery hang on the whim of grant funding. And I think we're at a point where that can no longer be the case. So I'm wondering what propensity there is in Welsh Government, in particular from the Minister, to wind grant funding, at least for a period of time, to get us through this really difficult patch, to wind grant funding into our revenue support grant. While I don't think it makes a huge difference in terms of the black hole that we face, it does, I think, allow us some additional security in knowing exactly what our income will be from Welsh Government as part of the wider revenue support grant, because decisions are often made at the last minute. I think it's the very last week just before Christmas that we'd expect some indication from Welsh Government. That can't continue. So at least for a period of time, we will know perhaps in the next 2, 3, 4, possibly even 5 years if this is considered an emergency position. And I think we're beyond that, given the scale of the cuts that we are facing. Just wondered what conversations are being had in Welsh Government. What propensity is there? What knowledge and awareness? What is the Minister doing to help, really, and ministers in general? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pennell-Thomas. Caris?
I was going to say, would you like me to come in there, Chair? I think many of you will know that for many years, actually, local government has been lobbying very hard that the grants do actually come into the revenue support grant rather than sit as a grant stream, for exactly the reasons that have just been outlined, really. First of all, it means we've got continuity with regards to funding running forward. It also gives us as an authority a bit more flexibility at times to use that money to meet the need that's displaying within Bridgend, and that is not always exactly the same as the grants. I mean, I think just before I answer that question directly, we did a piece of work about a year ago on how much revenue grants we actually receive as an authority. And this time last year, we were receiving over £80 million in revenue grants. Some of those have subsequently dropped off and some of those were one-offs, and therefore that figure, we will review it. But that does show, it does, you know, absolutely support the comments that we are heavily dependent on these grant streams. I think the one thing to say is that Welsh Government has started a review now of all of the grants that the authorities are receiving, and they're doing it by service area within Welsh Government, and all departments in Welsh Government have been asked to look at the grant streams that they are supporting and to come up with a reason really why they should not remain as grants. In other words, why they shouldn't revert into the RSG, and that work is being done at a fair bit of pace. To be fair, they were hoping to bring some of those changes in for the next financial year, yet to know whether or not that's confirmed. I think the one thing I would say, though, is that you'll all be aware that the financial implications that we're seeing are also being reflected in the Welsh Government's budget. So there is always a danger that some of these grants may transfer into the RSG. Sorry, the revenue support grant, but we don't know whether they would transfer at the same level at which they're currently coming in as a grant. So that is one risk with that transfer, that actually the total sum may decrease. But I suppose the quick answer, after saying all of that, is that Welsh Government is doing a lot of work at the moment to try and reduce the volume of money that's actually tied up in grants and transferring it into the revenue support grant for councils going forward.
You're on mute, Chair.
You're on mute, Chair.
That's why no one's responding to me then. Councillor Pennell-Thomas, are you content with that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Carys.
Thank you, Carys. Councillor Griffiths, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a series of questions, actually, and they fit into three categories. One which is looking back, one which is looking in year, and one which is looking forward to next year. And I'm very aware that this is COSC, and we're trying to work out how did we get into this position, what we're going to do about this position today, and how do we prevent this position from getting even worse last year. I think those are the three things I'd like us to think about. And I guess the first question is that what we set a budget, less than a year ago, and we've seen quite substantial deviation from the budget that we set, all in a negative, pretty much all in a negative point of view, in that we have overspent on very many areas, and not all of those overspends have been because of increase of service requirement, and many of them have been because of inflation and other areas. So my only conclusion is that we were not sufficiently pessimistic in our projections when we set the budget last year, and given that we weren't sufficiently pessimistic, and it's left us with at this current point of view a £10 million overspend. If we don't take a pessimistic view now when we set the new budget, then we will have double the problem again next year. In effect, we set the deficit budget last year. That is what it is, because we were insufficiently pessimistic. No, I know that we have a legal requirement to set a balanced budget, but in fact, we possibly didn't do that because we didn't project correctly how bad things would be. And I would caveat a little bit to say that we knew how bad things were a year ago. It was October last year where prices were going absolutely haywire. We knew that inflation was projected to be pretty high, and I know our Prime Minister promised to bring it down, but I don't think anybody actually believed him. And so we are in a position where I think I'm trying not to be too negative about what we did last year, because I think we did it in good faith. But I think as we go forward, we have to learn the lesson of we have to be very pessimistic for next year. Otherwise, we will have to carry over a -20, and then we will have a -20 next year as well on top, because we haven't been sufficiently pessimistic. So I think that's a lesson that I'd really like us to learn for next year. So if I'll stop there, that's my first series of questions about what lessons do we learn from the position we're in at the moment. If I could hand that over, maybe Carys.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. And just as a rider to that before Carys comes in, you make a valid point there in saying, if overspends are carried forward, directorates are already under significant pressure, aren't they? And they're at a disadvantage in meeting the required budget reductions in the next financial year. So I think during this period of economic turbulence, to say the least, is this sustainable without cutting some services altogether? Because this is clearly a very real prospect now. And I guess the political question as well is, rather than spreading ourselves too thin, is it better to do less, but better?
Yeah. If I could fix it to the question I asked, which is what are the lessons we should learn about setting the budget from last year? And then if we could come on to the questions about how we fix it this year and how we fix it next year, if you don't mind. So if I could, at the moment, if we could fix on the problem of what do we learn from the budget setting process last year to prevent the same problem with a significant underestimation of our expenditure for next year. So maybe Carys.
Yeah, your questions were noted. Carys, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think I would just say we didn't set a deficit budget this year. We set a budget that we knew was difficult, but I don't think we set a deficit budget this year. We did make assumptions around inflation, and we made assumptions about service demand. Service demand has remained high in certain areas where the predictions were it may have fallen, and inflation has remained higher than we'd anticipated as well. Both of those, our budgets are very sensitive to those two particular issues, and therefore, you know, inflation goes right across our organisation and is impacting. I think expectations have remained high, both with regards to service delivery and also with regards to those people, some of them who provide services for us, and therefore I think the Chief Exec has already outlined that, you know, the costs of new tenders coming in remain very, very high. I think we limited growth in this year's budget because of the financial pressures that we had, and in some service areas it's been possible to keep services within what we'd planned. In others, it's just proved not possible to do, really. So I think one of the lessons learned is about pressures, about how we clarify those for you, both from a service perspective, but also from a finance perspective and a risk perspective. I think the final thing, and I know this may be leading on to where you're going next, is around I think there probably are some difficult decisions that we need to have discussions about with regards to the breadth of service that we provide, and also possibly the level at which that service is provided. So touching on the comment that's already been made about do we do less but better. So I would, you know, I think there are challenges in this year's budget, and I absolutely agree that there are some lessons learned that we need to take forward when we're looking into next year's budget setting as well.
Thank you very much, Caris. Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Caris said, and I do take Councillor Griffiths' point. I suppose if pessimistic, based on the evidence I have, so is every other Welsh local authority, because we're all projecting significant overspends. So I think there is a particular set of circumstances here, which has caused problems throughout every local authority in terms of I dare not use the word exponential, Councillor Griffiths, but additional demand, extraordinary demand across services. And I think Caris has then outlined the inflationary impact and still the impact of expectation. So if I answer your question then specifically about what lessons are learned, I think that the lessons for me are first and foremost really clearly about having clear priorities and focus. It is incredibly difficult. I think either you or the chair alluded to this. It's incredibly difficult to try and carry on doing everything, particularly to the same level. So I think it's the lessons learned for me is absolute clarity and articulation of our priorities. And of course, the corporate plan helps us do that, but no doubt there's still a political debate around that. And the other lesson, I think, which I've already illustrated, which partly answers your second question about what we're doing, is earlier action. We have this year taken the view much earlier within year that there are things that we need to do, and we've done to help restrict spend, to selectively look at vacancy freezes and all the things I outlined earlier. But that said, I've been here long enough to also know that we also get criticised when we're insufficiently optimistic and we end up with underspends at the end of the year. So it's a delicate balancing act, this. But I do take your point, and I think I don't think any of us are underestimating how difficult this is going to be this year. But of course, if we're more pessimistic, the figure I put earlier of 20 million probably isn't 20 million, is it? It's probably 25. And what I would say is, ultimately, that's not just a figure. That's about services. That's about things that we wouldn't be able to do to that value. So I do take your point, but I hope that's helpful in terms of response. Thank you.
Councillor Griffiths, would you like to come back at all?
Yeah, if I may come in, I think I accept the situation. I never like answers which are, well, everybody else got it wrong too. That doesn't really sort of help us, I think. I'm glad that we should be looking at, maybe pessimistic isn't the right word, but I think we need to have a budget set for next year which we have a very high degree of confidence that we will hit the numbers. I would prefer next year for us to be slightly underspent on our budget rather than overspent. And I think when we go through the budget process, we have to bear that in mind, is that things are still likely to get worse. And so how do we get to a 90% certainty that we will be underspent on our budget for next year by setting an appropriate budget? I can pick up on your points about what we do in year. So moving to the second set of questions, Chair, which is You mentioned much earlier, Mark, a 5-point plan that you mentioned about in year. I wonder whether what's the scrutiny process we're going through on that 5-point plan, and is it a plan with specific targets against each of those, with savings against each of those items on the plan? Have you been able to do that? And if you have, can we which scrutiny committee would that plan go to for scrutiny?
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Harris, Mark.
I'm happy to respond. I'm more than happy to share progress and monitoring with scrutiny, whichever is the relevant scrutiny, perhaps the corporate scrutiny committee. Just to give you some reassurance, I suppose, is that at CMB we are monitoring this literally on a weekly basis, but I think we would also then share regularly with CCMB, so involving Cabinet as well. Whether there are specific targets, I don't think I could claim that there were, because I think it's a little bit speculative, the impact really. But the overall target is that the overspend position of forecast of 11 million has to come down significantly, and the more we can bring that down, then obviously the better for next year's budget. But I think we're happy to share not just the overview, but some of the detail in terms of, if you like, the posts that we've stopped advertising, some of the spend that we've stopped. I think one of the things Karis would say, though, with apologies, Karis, but with your long experience in this sort of area, is that one of the challenges, Councillor Griffiths, is there's a lot of spend within the organisation, relatively low spend, but cumulatively comes to quite a lot, which happens at quite a low level. And it's really cultural, a lot of this. It's about actually getting people to think, do I absolutely need to spend that? Or if I do I absolutely need to spend it now? What would be the impact if I had to wait a number of months or wait 6 months or whatever? So my belief is that it is that element that will make the biggest difference, just causing people to think slightly differently about what they spend and when they spend it. And I think that will probably make the biggest overall difference. But we're happy to have the conversation with you about sharing that with COSC and providing you whatever detail you want.
Thank you very much, Mark. We're going to move on now to...
May I come back on that, Chair?
No, Councillor Griffiths. No, Councillor Griffiths. We're going to move on now to discuss some further points. Otherwise, we won't have time to discuss everything. We're going to bring in now Councillor Amanda Williams just to pick up some points on Councillor Williams's question on council tax collection.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Because I've got some Wi-Fi issues here with the bad weather. Yeah, I had a question from the report on council tax collection rates. The report says we aren't yet able to predict our position. It's too early on in the year. So I wondered, are we prosecuting for non-payment of council tax? And how much does this cost us? Because obviously, if we're not getting the council tax, we're going to be paying court fees and solicitors' fees costs. At what stage do we decide court action? And whilst I'm not saying we should allow everyone not to pay the council tax, because everyone would do that then, how do we determine when we take legal action, and how much does that cost us as an authority? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Karis?
Yes, thank you for that question. We do ask people to pay their council tax. We have triggers in the system, after which point we will take various actions by way of reminders and reminding people that they have fallen behind with their payments. You're absolutely right. The last sanction we use is court action. We do take people to court. And actually, I was in a meeting recently where we're just putting together the summonses actually for next month. The numbers going out for council tax actually are slightly lower than they have been. But we do issue summonses for people. Not all of those people end up in court, because some of those people will pay on receipt of a court summons, or we will get into discussions with people about a repayment plan so that we can agree repayment over a period of time, and we do that in consultation with them. And then some people will end up in court with a decision with regards to the payback of that money. I just want to reassure you that we do have a number of steps that we go through before we consider court action, and we do try to get into a dialogue with people to agree a repayment plan. It's certainly not the first first action that we take. And as I said, for some people, they don't pay until they get the court summons, and then they will pay us. So it's certainly not the first course of action that we take, but we do pursue court action if people are not working with us and if their council tax is not being paid. There will be costs associated with that. I don't have that information to hand, Councillor Williams, but I can certainly make it available if it, you know, I can send that on to you.
Thank you very much, Caris. Councillor Griffiths, please.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my mic off. Thank you very much, Chair. So the other question I really wanted to ask was about setting the budget process for next year. Obviously, that process has started now with BREP, but I don't actually see how we can learn from the lessons of last year and manage to get BREP to do the scrutiny on setting the process for the next year. So I wonder how we put a process around in the short term about how we move forward on the budget process, with being able to take in the comments, the lessons that we're learning today, and then for BREP to be able to do that scrutiny on that process to make sure that it's going correct this year. So I wonder whether there's a short-term plan in place, or a very detailed plan around the budget setting process itself for this year, so that we can make sure that we are learning the lessons from last year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths, but we are going to move on to discuss directorates shortly. So, Caris, perhaps you can provide a brief reply.
Yes, certainly. We have changed the process slightly this year, actually, and that is learning the lessons and also actually acknowledging just how very difficult it is going to be to set next year's budget. So our normal process is that directorates have identified possible savings to go forward into next year. We've introduced an extra stage in that now of more of a deep dive really into those proposals, and also to tease out whether or not there are any other savings that directorates can find, and that process is currently underway. And the proposal, Councillor Williams, was that we bring those into BREP, possibly on a service by service basis, for you to be able to do exactly the same thing and to have early view where it's possible of some of the discussions that have already taken place as to the feasibility of some of those savings, so that we can take that process through. So I think we are learning the lessons and doing those deeper dives this year, just because of the very significant issues we have in trying to balance a budget for next year.
Thank you very much, Caris. Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be courteous to yourself, I have to leave the meeting at 11 o'clock. I got a prior meeting with DC officers. I'll be about half an hour, but I will be back to the meeting, Chair. Just letting you know.
Great. Thank you very much for mentioning that, Councillor Granville. Look forward to having you back in the meeting at 11:30. We're now going to move on to discuss the directorates, and I'll invite Councillor John Paul Blundell and our Corporate Director for Education, Lindsay Harvey, to make some opening remarks.
Who would you like to go first, Chair?
Councillor Blundell, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. As you can see in the report, there's obviously 3 areas of the education budget that are overspent in the broader sense of it. Learner support, obviously around the placement, out-of-county placements in Heronsbridge and Ysgol Bryn Castell. Obviously, we're hopefully going to be able to bring that number down in the long term as we try and build a brand new Heronsbridge. And there's also a piece of work going on about how we can sort of spend to save, sort of how we can bring more of those children in county, because obviously it's much cheaper to teach them in county than it is outside. Home to school transport is obviously our biggest overspend. I think going on the difficult decisions that we're going to have to make, maybe we have to have a look at this, how we deliver home to school transport. We've often said that we do have a gold standard homeschool transport in the sense of we go much further than some local authorities, but that will need not just political will from cabinet, but it will also need a tough decision from the rest of the 50 men, all 51 of us, because large majority of us have very different views on homeschool transport. So I'm hoping that's something me and Lindsay can sort of have a discussion and bring to BREP once we've sort of got any sort of move forward on that. And the other one then is catering services. Because of food inflation, we are making a loss on every school dinner that we sell. I'd like to point out it's not really around the free school meal element in primary schools. It's about the meals that we sell, mainly that we sell in other parts of the schools, in other school and in secondary schools and comprehensives. We are the lowest. We charge the least amount for dinners in Wales. I think we've got the figures to say that now. So as you can see, and obviously the cost of food has gone up and up and up, and we haven't put up our costs accordingly. So we are obviously at a loss to that. So that's obviously causing an overspend there. But it is difficult in education. I'm not, as everyone is, we're going to have to make difficult choices. We're going to all 51 of us, when it comes to the budget, not just cabinet, we're all going to have to make difficult decisions, because to get anywhere near that sort of budget level down and to balance a budget, or even, as Councillor Griffiths alluded to, trying to have an underspend budget, you have to sort of look at education as, I think, third of the overall budget. So those are the real things. I know it's a bit doom and gloom, that, but I feel doom and gloom is the words of the day. I don't know if Lindsay has anything to add before we ask members to questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Blundell. Lindsay, any supplementary remarks?
Thanks, Chair. Just to continue what Councillor Blundell has said, really is an extremely difficult budget position. The one thing I would add, I don't want to repeat what Councillor Blundell has quite rightly said, but it's the statutory nature of some of the services this directorate provides. Now, obviously, a number of the services, not just in my directorate, but across the council, are a legal requirement. It is a challenge. So Councillor Blundell has identified some of the challenges with regard to inclusion services, so within learner support. Obviously, these are statutory requirements when they're specified within an individual development plan or within a statement. So that's a key area, and we need to meet that. And in addition to that, when we look at eligible learners for homeschool transport, again, we need to provide that. So that is a challenge. Councillor Blundell is absolutely right with regard to some of the pressures we're facing around cost inflation. Clearly, that affects catering services with the school meals, and it's something we're working very closely with schools on. I'm not going to go any further, Chair. I think that provides a summary. More than happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you very much, both to Councillor Blundell and to Lindsay, for that overview and providing the context for the Education and Family Support Directorate. I'll bring in Councillor Bennett first.
Thank you, Chair. So going to 3.3.1, the schools delegated budget, it notes that there are 23 schools projecting a deficit, and that results in bringing the surplus balances right down to 72,960. Can I ask, what help are we giving to schools to keep them on track with their budgets, or at least from worsening this position? And what is the impact on those schools if they have to carry forward a deficit budget, noting that the reserves are possibly not there? Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Bennett. There's two areas, really. So first of all, it's helping schools with monitoring their own spend. It's exceptionally challenging. As you know, there's a lot of members of this committee who are school governors, and they will have seen firsthand how challenging some school budgets are at the moment. So we meet every month, myself and finance officers, to go through every school budget, and we have a very close analysis of it. We then meet with head teachers and governors if there are significant deficits within that, and set with the schools a deficit recovery plan. Now, by law, the schools must return to a balanced budget within 3 years. In extenuating circumstances, there are 5 years allowed for this, and obviously we work very closely with schools to do that. In addition to the monitoring and support for the budget development plans, there are a number of corporate services we provide clearly to help schools achieve economies of scale over their spend. So there's a lot of central services that we've mentioned earlier with regard to education psychology service, education welfare service. So we centralise some of those services rather than schools operating them on themselves. And also we look at commercial opportunities by brokering certain services. The most recent example of this is the Legal Services for Schools service level agreement, where instead of all schools having individual agreements with individual legal firms, we've pulled together one service level agreement for all the schools to buy into at a considerably reduced cost. What impact will it have going forward? Well, clearly we've identified a potential efficiency saving within the medium-term financial strategy. That's going to be of a significant impact on schools if that's enacted or increased. We know this. We've talked to head teacher colleagues about this, and One of the things I will be doing, I'll be meeting with all heads in Bridgend on the 9th of November, where we'll be going through some modelling scenarios of what that will look like. When I get information back from schools, then obviously we'll provide that to this committee and other fora.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Councillor Bennett, you content with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Griffiths, please.
I just want to come back on the point that Councillor Blundell made a little bit earlier about potentially the need to charge more for school meals, and I think this is almost a microcosm of the choices that we as a council will have to make over the next year, which is that families are already struggling to feed their children. We know that there's malnourishment within the borough, where for a number of children the only good meal they actually get is in the school, and for us to have to think about putting more expenditure onto those families, it's almost inconceivable that that's what we will have to do. And unfortunately, this is the position we're in. And it does make me think about we're in a situation of what is a least harm approach across the council, which is what are the things that we would cut that would have least harm? Because I think we have to accept that there will be harm. There will be harm that we will cause as a council because of our legal requirement to set a balanced budget. And I think that puts me, from my conscious point of view, in a very, very difficult position. But it is just emblematic, I think, of the very, very difficult situation we're in. Sorry, this is not really a question; it's just a comment. But Councillor Blundell, I completely agree with your statements earlier, and it's a very, very sorry situation that we're in, and the nature of the choices we have to make are going to be pretty horrible, I think, and unconscionable, I think, to many of us. But it's decisions we are going to have to make. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Anyone like to make any comments, or wasn't a question, was it? It was just a statement of support. So we'll move on to Councillor Hughes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Griffiths has picked up on a number of points that I did make at the pre-meeting. Just to acknowledge that there are discussions going on about the catering services and the pricing policy that's in place at the moment. If we could just ask Lindsay, when were prices last reviewed? And what's the current thinking about how we could possibly achieve a break-even situation with the cost of meals that we are providing? How far away are we from that? And I just sort of reaffirm my reservations about the whole cost of living issue, which Councillor Griffiths has already mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Lindsay?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Hughes. And again, thanks, Councillor Griffiths, because again, we absolutely understand the pressure on families here. We review figures constantly, Councillor Hughes, and the last formal review, I believe, was 2 years ago. That's when we had the figures from all Wales, and we look at this through the ADU, the Association of Education Directors in Wales, and the school catering group, so we get figures back there. And obviously, we continually work with that group to understand the picture across Wales. The challenge inevitably at the moment is cost inflation, and what we are seeing is food costs significantly increased month on month, actually, and it's a real challenge to the catering service. You will be aware that the catering service in Bridgend is an award-winning service. In fact, it's up for an award next week, I believe. So, it's a particularly well thought of service that always goes above and beyond the call of duty to deliver the best possible service. But it is incredibly challenging. Now, obviously, as a council, the decision has been made to set the school meal prices low, and again, that will be welcomed by families, no doubt, especially in this difficult time. And we're trying to work with families, obviously, to make sure that we support children, not just at free school meal level at lunchtime, but also school breakfast provision. Now, on that point, Chairs, you'll be aware there's another pressure for the local authority, because in some cases it's very, very difficult to provide that breakfast provision in conjunction with the school governing bodies, because there is very difficult staffing situations within those schools. So that is a particular challenge. In addition to that, and something that should be welcomed actually, is the Welsh Government's Universal Primary Free School Meal Initiative. This will seek to provide all learners in primary school settings with a free school meal, but of course that will limit any sort of commercial opportunities for income generation within that field. Hence the comment that Councillor Blundell quite rightly made earlier, and we're working with secondary schools to make sure we support them in providing equity in the settings there. So it's a difficult picture, Councillor Hughes, continually monitored. But the one thing I will assure you is that we do have a particularly good schools catering service that will always seek to put the needs of children first, but be mindful of the very difficult budget situation they find themselves in.
Thank you, Lindsay. Councillor Hughes, you content with that reply?
Yeah, could we have an indication then, Lindsay, of when the next review will be completed?
It's ongoing, Councillor Hughes. So what we're aiming to do is that we're looking at the budget position now in conjunction with other local authorities as well, because obviously I think, as Councillor Griffith said earlier, is to make sure we learn lessons, not just internally, but from other local authorities. So that's ongoing. We would hope by the end of this quarter to have some indication of the figures, and I'd be more than happy sharing those with the committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a number of questions on education, but if I pick up the ones on the free school meals and the school meals budget at the moment, and then come back to the others. So we're talking about the meals and the reviews. First question is, as Chair of Governors in a primary school, I regularly go in and check the quality of the meals and the timings and everything like that. And what I find is you've got 3-year-olds who are on the same portion sizes as 11-year-olds. There's a lot of waste with the younger children, and the older children are going hungry because they said it's not enough food for them. So I'd like that to be part of the review as well, because it's scandalous. So if we're talking about this overspend, how much food is actually wasted as well. The younger children, half of it gets scraped off straight into the bins. So perhaps there's a way of looking at portion sizes as well as to whether they're sufficient. Vacancies in schools, you touched on that. With this blanket freeze on recruitment, does that mean that we're not still going to be looking for these dinner ladies and these kitchen staff and everything, lunchtime supervisors, or are we still pushing ahead? Because I know some schools have got a number of vacancies and it's a difficult job to try and recruit to, because it's an hour or 2 hours in a day. And I know we've lost lunchtime supervisors because for those 1 hour a day or 2 hours, they can't then get benefits. They've reduced benefits. So we've seen an increase in people handing their notice in recently. So that was my questions on the current system, but I had one then on free school meals. You said it's a universal free school meals for primary age, but we're the only local authority with the nursery in schools. Will we get funding from Welsh Government for this, for the 3-year-olds, for the nursery, or do we have to fund that ourselves? So that was my question on that, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Thanks both Councillor Williams. With regard to the portion size, I think it's a really well made point. Obviously, as far as the catering service is concerned, we follow Welsh Government guidance on this, but we can certainly feed that comment back through because it's in line with another requirement. And again, it's a legal requirement with schools about waste management. So not just an equity issue, Councillor Williams, obviously from a waste management point of view, it's something we want to avoid. So I can certainly ask Louise Scrutiny, our catering manager, to feed that back to the All Wales group and seek clarification on that. With regard to the recruitment issue with catering services, as the Chief Exec indicated earlier, that we see this as an essential part. So we're not looking at any freeze on this area. However, in line with all council services, we are looking very closely to see how we can maximise the service here. So it's going to be a challenge, but ultimately to meet our statutory duty, we'll need to have staff in there because we don't want to place schools at risk. The last one with regard to nursery funding, I'm not aware of Welsh Government funding for nursery provision universal free school meals. Caris might be able to clarify if something has come through on that, but I am not aware of any funding for that.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Councillor Blundell, did you want to make a contribution as well? Because I was conscious your hand was up.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, Chair. The beauties of working at home and my wife being out, parcel came, but Lindsay's covered all the points I was going to make, so apologies. I won't hold the meeting up.
No problem at all. Caris, did you want to add anything on what Lindsay said then?
I think actually just to support what Lindsay said, I don't believe we do get funding in relation to this. It's the decision of Bridgen to have this as a full-time provision rather than a part-time. So I doubt that we would get any funding in relation to that.
Okay, thank you, Caris. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back on that?
Not on this, is for my next questions, but I'm conscious Councillor Gebby's got her hand up, so I didn't know if she wanted to reply to something I've said.
Yeah, maybe. So, Councillor Gebby?
Thank you very much, Chair. No, I was actually going to remind members of which bits of the Education Directorate sit in my portfolio, but that's for after these questions. Thanks very much.
Sure, I know there's some overlap, isn't there? So, yeah, conscious of that as well. Councillor Williams, back to you then for your other education questions.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. So I've got one question again on school meals, and you're talking about the cost of school meals in comprehensive schools. Now, a number of comprehensive schools have got capacity issues, the larger schools, they can't feed all of their children on site, so they're having to send certain years out into town to purchase their food because they simply can't get through everyone. This is now at an increased cost because obviously if we've got a good value meal, and I think the comprehensive meals are good value for money, when you go into McDonald's or you go into Greggs or something, you're not getting the quality meals, and families are having to pay more through no fault of their own because there's not capacity at schools. So I wanted to raise that with regards to school meals as well, because obviously that's something that need to be considered. But then I've got other questions on the budget itself now, and the overspends. So obviously I've gone on numerous times, I'm chair of governors, and I think firstly we need to point out it's very difficult when you're in a new build school and you've already made so many cost savings, because when you open a new school, you don't break even until you've got 28 children in that class. So you're already at a loss until you get to the school, and every school is not going to fill a class of up to 28 from day one. So I have got concerns with that. I've got concerns with any future cuts, because if we're saying now 37% or 39% of schools are deficit budget, if we've got future, given that we've only got that couple of 100,000 now in the pot overall for all schools, you're going to find that all schools would be in a deficit, I think, coming by the end of next year. And I'm concerned as to how those schools will get out of it. I know going through COITI, we have cut everything to the bone already to get out of the deficit from the new build, and other schools would be in the same position. So I worry about all of that. I've also got concerns with regards to the mutual fund, and I wondered what we're doing with that, because I know the schools don't get these figures until after, well, they didn't this year, until after the new financial year. So schools were predicting that they would be in a good position, and they actually finished in a deficit because they weren't given the figures for the mutual fund until May, and they'd already supposedly set their budgets for April. So I wondered what we're doing to make sure that all of the information and all of the costs that you're going to claw back from schools are going to be sent on to schools before the end of the financial year, so that they can complete their budgets for the next year and also close their books of knowing where they stand, because it's very difficult if you're not getting that information until last minute. And then I've read the financial scheme for schools from page 1 to the end. I've sat there. It's hard going, but I have read every page, and I think the problem is sometimes schools are being asked to do things that are not in line with the financial schemes for schools. And I know these meetings now that we're all having, our schools that are in deficit, we're meeting with the Education Directorate to discuss how we're going to get out of deficit. And then it's different. So you've got, I think the financial scheme for schools says if you've got a 5% deficit, you will be called into a meeting, but it's changed now. So actually, if you're in £50,000 deficit, but you're within the 5%, you're still meeting with schools. So I think it would be nice to have some clarity over which what's happening, and on that basis, when will the financial schemes for schools when's it due to be looked at and updated? Because I don't think it's been updated since 2015. So I think it's, I'd like clarity on that as well, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brundle. I think you indicated first, and then I'll bring in Lindsay.
Just on the point of budgets in school, we do try and give, for everything that we control the budgets of the grants, we do try and get Welsh Government to give the schools clarity as soon as possible. And as soon as we get clarity, we try and pass that along to schools. Now, there was a bit of as you mentioned, there was a delay last year. I've raised this numerous times with the minister, as the other 21 of my colleagues, as in the WLGA as education cabinet members, so that schools need more clarity sooner rather than later on these things. And we do try and give heads as much of a heads up from our end when it comes to budget as soon as possible. Lindsay mentioned there about earlier about his meeting with in Team Bridgend, myself and Lindsay, Carys and Councillor Hal Williams all meet in the budget forum with heads from both secondary and primary schools, and we do try and lay out the picture for them as soon as possible. So we do try and give heads, deputy heads, and whenever we meet them, we always try and give them as much information as physically possible. But obviously, you'll be aware, Welsh Government set their budget in December, we set ours in February, and it is a difficult time. So we do try our best to give as much warning and as much information as possible to heads. I don't know if Lindsay's got any more on sort of the logistical side of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Blundell. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Williams. I'll try and cover off each of the queries in turn, if I may, and if you need additional information, please let me know. So first of all, you referred to the off-site issues that for lunchtime for one of our schools. As you know, Councillor Williams, is something that we are working with the school on, and it doesn't affect just the school I know that you are supporting as a governor. There's a number of issues there. First of all, around the nutrition levels within the school meals. Obviously, we are governed by statutory Welsh Government guidance on that. So like you, I would prefer schools' children to be eating in schools. And again, there are, as you mentioned, a number of health and safety issues about learners leaving the school site that we need to work very carefully with on the school there. With the next one, you talk about some of the challenges with new schools and retrospective funding. I completely understand this, and I know the challenge, obviously, the Coity Primary School has been in, as with some of our other schools. And just for the committee and for members of the public who are watching this, the challenge is as a new school grows, the funding follows the pupil in retrospective fashion the year later. So it is a very difficult situation for a school to set that budget within the year. Obviously, we are mindful of that, and we do work with the school on that particular area. The other point you raise is about all schools moving into a deficit, and that's going to be a challenging one over the next year, depending on, of course, what happens with regard to efficiency savings agreed by Council in respect to the medium-term financial strategy. As I mentioned earlier, we have to work very closely with schools on that. Schools have already identified this year is that could mean challenging staffing situations. So again, we didn't have that significant feedback last year around staffing. We are getting it this year if further cuts are being made. You mentioned then about some of the challenges around the financial scheme for schools, and like you, I've read it through as well, so I know it's a long read. I will make sure that it's clarified. It's 50k for primary schools, 100k for a secondary school. But you are right, Councillor Williams. To look at it, it could be quite confusing with regard to the 5% level. So I'll make sure that's clarified with Section 151 going forward on that. And I think the last point you raised is around early information. I know Councillor Brundle has picked that up. It's very, very difficult. Schools obviously want information as soon as possible, not just in relation to potential clawbacks of the mutual fund expenditure, but just for budget management. And it's exceptionally difficult with head teachers to plan going ahead when we only get this information on a yearly basis. Obviously, this is not just Bridgend. So what I tend to do is, as I mentioned earlier, I meet with heads well in advance of budget settlements with this made by council, and ask heads to model different scenarios. Now, by modelling different scenarios, we look at from the best possible to the worst possible scenarios. Some of them are very, very difficult, but at least then they've had plenty of opportunity to liaise with education staff and finance staff to look at the art of the possible. I trust I've answered everything, but if not, please let me know.
Thank you, Lindsay. Councillor Williams?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Gebby, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's just to make a further contribution for all governors to be aware of that until teachers' pay claim is organised and they have accepted their offer, there will be some clawbacks that council will be unable to make because we don't know which staff have been on strike, when they've been on strike, and they've been paid currently because trade unions are refusing to give that information over to us in order that we can manage around their pay arrangements. And I just think that's something else we need to be mindful of going forward. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Councillor Gebby. Are there any other questions on the Education and Family Support Directorate from members? I don't see anyone indicating, so I have a couple. With regards to, you mentioned, Councillor Blundell and Lindsay, the pressures on home to school transport. The projected overspend at the moment is 1.158 million. I think that was reduced from 1.316 million in Q1. So I'd be interested in hearing why or how that's reduced. And of course, we mentioned on a regular basis the policy guidance from the Welsh Government, which we've been waiting for some time now, so that we can go out to consultation on how we make changes to home to school transport in the next academic year to make it more financially sustainable going forward. Do we have any further insight on when that will be forthcoming? Then moving to family support. Will this underspend be sustained due to the recruitment freeze, which our Chief Executive mentioned earlier? And what operational impact will it have in carrying these vacancies in this particular service area? And then on corporate health and safety, why has the decision been made to appoint agency staff as opposed to permanent staff? And I guess that is lack of permanent staff. And has this had and I expect the answer is yes, has this had a detrimental impact on the budget? Lindsay?
Thanks, Chair. Do you want me to cover them off, Councillor Blundell?
Yep. Yeah, go on, Lindsay.
Okay, so homeschool transport, you asked about the reduction there. It's been very carefully managed as far as contract management is concerned here. Members of this committee will be aware it's been particularly difficult in homeschool transport. The challenge has been when we've gone to contract, obviously we've gone to tender, some of the awards have been significantly higher than anticipated. We are aware, of course, of our local transport providers. They have increased costs. So they're working very closely with us on that. And we are fortunate because the transport providers in Bridgend do a very good job with our learners in transporting our learners to school. But it is challenging for them and it's challenging for us as a council. With regard to the policy, Chair, as you know, this is something I know the leader, Councillor Blundell, and myself, we've all communicated with Welsh Government on more than one occasion seeking this. And again, we continually ask this to ADU because I think all local authorities were keen to see what's coming out of this new review. With regard to family support, excuse me, Chair, you'll see from the narrative in the report is a significant grant funding has come in for this particular area. And I think the key thing is just to emphasise is that it's a selective vacancy management freeze. And I think that's the important bit here. Obviously, if it's a grant funded position, if there's no opportunity to use that grant elsewhere, we would need to press ahead with these posts or necessarily we'd lose the grant. So we don't want to be in that position as a local authority. And again, what we seek to do is recruit at speed now into these posts, because in a lot of cases, especially around the EF, this is dealing with some of our more vulnerable young people that we're obviously keen to support. The last point with the Corporate Health and Safety Unit, you'll be aware, Chair, that we've gone out several times to try and recruit health and safety professionals into this post. And to meet our duties, we've had to use vacancy staff in the interim. I can report that very recently we have appointed full-time staff, so we're really lowering the reliance on agency staff. So again, that's good news. It is a very small team, as you'll be aware, Chair, but currently it's very little dependency on vacancy, but obviously we're carrying that pressure from previous quarters.
Great, thanks for that comprehensive answer, Lindsay. Councillor Blundell, please.
Yeah, just to add on sort of the political side of the homeschool transport new policy coming from Welsh Government. As I said in response to Councillor Williams about the 22 local authority cabinet members for education, we've all raised this again with both ministers for education and Welsh language, Jeremy Miles, and the Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters, who it sits under. I've yet to see any sort of movement, sort of a finite date. We've had, Lindsay's mentioned there through Adu and officers. There's nothing has come across through the political circles of where we are with this, which is sort of, I think, pushing us now towards making decisions on home to school transport, which we were quite rightly in the previous cabinet in the previous term wanted to wait because we didn't think it was going to be that far away down the road. It's now seeming to be quite far away down the road, and as you can imagine, there's still another 4 years left of the Senedd term, and I'm hoping we can see more of this when the bus contract and the bus bill goes in front of the Senedd, but they've said they wanted to tie the two contracts together, which is hopefully innovative in its making. So, but other than that, there's just, we are pushing, but we're not seeming to get much of a strong answer of a date back. Sorry, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Blundell, and perhaps like before, we said that we would try and assist you as much as possible in getting some kind of timescale from the Welsh Government, and perhaps a recommendation can go forward in writing to the Welsh Government to ensure that they expedite the production of that policy as soon as possible, so that you can make some very difficult but necessary decisions in this particular area. Okay, members, does anyone else have any questions on the Education and Family Support Directorate? Okay, on that basis, I'm conscious of the fact that members have asked me to take regular breaks, so we'll take just a 5-minute break and return at 11:30, and we'll discuss I'll bring forward the Communities Directorate because I'm conscious that Councillor Farr needs to leave at 12:15, I think she mentioned, so we'll consider Communities next and then Social Services. Okay, see you at 11:30, everyone.